Hiya, welcome to Geoff and Heather's Dahlia garden on a typically British wet and dull afternoon. It's mid-August and most of the dahlias are now in bloom and looking good. A few stragglers have still got to show their heads, but already we've got a very nice effect, I think. Now we've only just returned from a week's holiday away, and in this episode I'm going to show you how I prepared for that holiday, what I did and how it's been effective in keeping the garden still looking nice when we got back. But I'm sure that most of you are tuning in because you want to hear me talking more about some of my favourite varieties. Well, I'll do that now that they're all looking good. Please note that in the comments field at the bottom of this video I've written all the names of the varieties that I talk about and the times when they appear on the video. Between the showers I've managed to get on top of all the tying up, and now the garden's more or less back to normal. In the previous episode I told you about some of the individual varieties that I grow and why I like them. In this episode I'm going to show you more of the same, but I'm also going to show you some of the same varieties again, but now they've got a lot more flowers growing. I think you'll be able to get a better perspective of why I like them. This one's Joe Sudi Pluto. Now I quite like this one, it's a lovely colour, and I like the fact that you get flowers at different heights within the same plant, so it gives a good picture. So far the stems are looking pretty strong too. Now isn't that beautiful? This one's Sandia Melody, a water lily sort, pink and white. I absolutely love this flower, it's so delicate. Cryfield Edna is proving to be a good reliable garden variety. Large flower, and I love the yellow, it's a lovely bright yellow. I think that last time when I showed you Hillcrest Firecrest there was only one flower in bloom. Well, now there are quite a few blooms, and you can see why people like it. It really looks like the embers of a fire, doesn't it? Now pale pink is not a colour I would normally go for, but I do like this marble effect on this dahlia called Crawshaw Sicily. But I particularly like the fact that the stems stay strong throughout the summer, which is quite unusual for a mini variety. The gentleman who raised it from seed gave it to a nurseryman for them to try to see whether they thought it was good enough. The nursery in turn gave one to me to try in the garden. I liked it, but I don't think the nurseryman did because it never appeared on the market. So who knows, I might have one of the few left in existence. This beauty is called Formby Art. I've grown it for a couple of years now. I can't say that the stems are particularly strong on it, but it's such a lovely effect, isn't it? The purpley pink contrasting with the white. This is the first time I've grown this medium semi-cactus called Grace Wood. So far I'm impressed, I love the colour, and the stems seem to be standing up okay to the wet weather that we've been having recently. This is quite an old variety, it's called Piper's Pink, a small semi-cactus. It always does well for me, I wouldn't be without this variety. This large pink variety is called Hollyhill Big Pink. I don't suppose that's a very subtle name, but it's a lovely dahlia, especially in the garden. I don't suppose it'd win prizes at exhibition, but it always produces these huge blooms on strong stems. It's one of the dahlias that attract lots of attention when people come round the garden. They always ask me about this one. And next to it I've got Whitterman's Superba. How's about that for a colour? Now you might not believe this, but I actually grew this variety from seed. I've not given it a name yet, it's called 4 of 18. But I think it's really nice. It actually won a prize in a photographic competition that the National Dahlia Society ran last year. I tend not to name my dahlias until I've been growing them for a year or two, so that I don't waste good names on poor dahlias. But I think that this one is going to deserve one before much longer. This variety always gets lots of comments when people come round the garden. It's called Crème de Cassis. People love the way that the light mauve of the front contrasts with the darker purple of the back of the petals. The only thing I've got against it is that when the petals start to die off, it goes a horrible black colour, so you do need to keep on top of the dead heading. But other than that, for something that only grows 3 to 4 feet, well, less than 3 feet actually when I think about it, it's a good garden variety. I think I showed you Canora Wow last time in the last episode. You can see why the Canora man named it Wow, can't you? Because that's what people said when they saw it. This giant semi-cactus is called Pink Jupiter. I've been growing it for a few years now, but I've always found it difficult to overwinter the tubers. I've had to get new stock again this year. I'm a little bit worried because at the moment it's only about 3 feet tall, and normally it grows to about 4.5 to 5 feet tall, so I'm beginning to wonder whether the stock's beginning to deteriorate. I like it so much that I've actually got a photo of it on the wall in our sitting room. I told you about Wanda's Capella, the giant decorative that I always grow because it produces lots of flowers. Well, here it is in all its glory, and as you can see, lots more blooms to come. This fimbriated variety is called Ninikazi, or I think that's how it's pronounced. I'll spell it out on the notes below this page. It is one of the few fimbriated types that I grow because most of them don't stand up to the rain, but it's been raining on this one and it doesn't look too bad, does it? Hillcrest Jonathan. Well, lots of flowers on this one. They're all different as well, so it would be hopeless for exhibition because they wouldn't be able to match them up to get 5 the same in a vase. But in a garden, it looks particularly attractive. This red and white one is called Hapitostria Flag. The trouble with all white-tipped dahlias is that they do have a tendency to revert to a single colour, and as you can see on the same plant, there's one there that's more or less all red with just the one little white fleck on it. That's the one problem with multicoloured dahlias like that. An American dahlia called Houston named all his varieties after members of his family. This one's called Elsie Houston. I think it's one of his best. It's a lovely colour, big flower. You probably don't get that many all at the same time, so it's a nice one to have at the back of the border. When Gordon LaRue, the man who produced all the Canora varieties, died, he left a few seedlings, and they decided to name this one after his wife, his widow. She's called Jeannie LaRue. It's a good variety. I talked about Western Spanish Dancer before. Lovely colour, lots of flowers, dead easy to grow. Well, there's now one that's very similar to Western Spanish Dancer, except the flowers are a little bit larger, slightly different colour, but it's a taller plant, so if you wanted to contrast one behind the other, it would work quite well. This one's called Crazy for Jessie. Now, you might remember in the previous episode that I told you about my bank-on tall growing variety. It's called Rycroft Delight. It always grows to about 8 feet. Well, this one is growing underneath a tree, and at the moment it's only about 4 feet tall. There's always one that catches you out, whereas that one's away from the tree and it's already 8.5 feet tall. I've been growing Parkland Rave for a few years. It is nice. Look at that, all those flowers on one plant. This one's called Shandy, one of my reliables. This variety was raised by Peter Hasselhofer in Austria. It's called Happy Unique. Nice colour. Not sure how strong it'll be later in the autumn. A few years ago, Western Spanish Dancer produced a pink and white sport. They named it Carol Spanish Dancer, presumably because somebody called Carol was the one who discovered it. I like it in the garden. The only trouble with it is it does have a tendency to go open-centered before the petals start to drop. My late friend Ken Stock raised this variety and named it Cleo Lane after a famous British jazz singer. Lovely colour, and it only grows to about 3 feet tall, so it's useful at the front of the border. Recommend it. I've been growing this pink and white medium semi-cactus for a few years now. It's called Amy Kay, I always put it underneath this tree because it's one of the few plants that seems to do quite well in the shade and a bit dry conditions. Another Austrian dahlia is Hapit elegans, a stripy purple and white giant decorative. I'm not sure that elegance is the right name for it, but a lot of people like this one. Not sure I do, but I'll keep it because other people like to look at it. Joel Louisa is one of my banker tall growing varieties. It's a water lily sort, and it always has very long stems. It's probably not strong enough for some people, but it seems to do the job for me throughout the summer. It's only when it gets to the late autumn that it starts to go a bit weak. All these blooms are on one plant of Rycroft pixie. A nice garden effect. While we were away on holiday, Heather and I visited a garden called Great Dixter in Sussex. Great Dixter was a garden that was designed by Christopher Lloyd. You might well have seen it on television. It often appeared on Gardener's World while he was alive. Over the years I've taken quite a lot of inspiration from that garden, the way that he uses his colours and heights of things to make a great display. I've tried to copy some of them. Well, you won't be surprised to hear that I made a video while I was there. Here are some snippets from it. If you're interested in seeing the full thing, then you need to go on YouTube and do a search under Geoff and Heather visit Great Dixter. Now I thought I'd thrown out Joe Sudi Aurora last year after it didn't give a particularly good showing. Perhaps fortunately I mislabelled this particular tuber, grown it thinking it was something else. But in this position it looks nice, doesn't it? So I'll probably give it another go again next year. Hollyhill Black Widow, probably classified as a water lily. I don't know how well the raindrops on the black show up, but it looks beautiful to me. And again, all these blooms are on the single plant. It's called Sunshine Paul, a medium decorative. This one's new to me this year. It's called Bargali Blush. Lovely pink, medium decorative. I think the dwarf dahlias at the front of the beds are beginning to give a nice display now. I've always liked Vera Cruz, Art Deco. Spanish Conquest. And Taxco. This giant decorative Hamari Gold is still continuing to flower well on strong stems, and it looks as though there are quite a lot more to come. So I'll give it another go. The only problem I have with it is that some of the flowers are below the level of the foliage, so you can't quite see them properly in the garden display. Gwyneth, now there's a colour. This one's new again this year. It's called Clearview Cameron. Nice colour. And another new one to me is called Jubilee Boy. I saw this at a show a few years ago and I've been wanting it ever since. Now I've got it, I'm not totally sure about it. It's a little bit wishy-washy colour really. I told you in the last episode how I always grow Canora Sunset. It's one of the loveliest colours in the garden. The only trouble with Canora Sunset is that the stems aren't particularly strong. But one with a very similar colour and stronger stems is called AC Abbey. Next year I think I'll probably grow more AC Abbey and less Canora Sunsets. Now I'm betting that a few of you have been watching previous episodes where I talked about my pot tubers or have been wondering how they've been getting on. I bet some of you have had sleepless nights. Well, here they are. You need not have worried. All tied up. They're all about 2 to 3 feet tall now. If the frost permit it, I will leave these in the ground until the rest of the field tubers have been brought in, dried off and stored. Then I'll take them into the greenhouse to dry off with the stalks still attached so that they dry out gradually. Then I'll put them in a box and store them over winter. If any of them were to produce a flower bud, I would take the bud off so that they concentrate their efforts on producing tubers rather than flowers. This little beauty is called Maxime. I love the way that the edges of the petals are trimmed with yellow. Now probably some of the Dahlia purists would discount this one because the flowers are at an angle of about 90 degrees to the stems. They would call it clock-faced and say it's not good enough. But I think it's worth growing just for the colour. This giant decorative is called Jean Shaw. Nice colour, it's a new one to me, it's looking good so far. And next to it I've got one called AC Dark Horse. Again, another new one to me. A mate of mine will love this one. I'm not sure I particularly like the shape of it, but I know he will, and lots of other people will. Earlier in this episode I showed you a dahlia that had grown from seed myself. I hadn't given it a name. Well, this is another one. In fact, over the years I've produced quite a lot of new varieties myself. This is the first one I ever grew. I called it Sunshine Zest because its parents were called Sunshine Paul and Wholewood Zest. And the second one I grew from seed I named Heather Patricia, after my wife. Now unfortunately it's probably a little bit on the coarse side, but having named it after my wife I've got to keep growing it, haven't I? The jury's out on this seedling. Lovely colour, not sure about the form though. I've had this old Suffolk lawnmower for many years. In fact, it's probably as old as I am. It still does the job though. You can see who doesn't use this very often, can't you? I've always had a soft spot for Cherwell Skylark. It doesn't look particularly exciting at the moment, but as the summer goes by it gets a darker colour and it grows taller, so it's more above the foliage than it is at the moment. I've been growing Carmen Bunky for a few years. It's a reliable tall grower. I don't suppose it would win any competitions in the water lily class, but it's a nice garden flower. Now the colouring on this one's pretty subtle. It's called Rycroft Rebel, medium decorative. I like the way that the ends of the petals are slightly pink compared with the white in the centre. This is the second year I've been growing Happit Sugar Lips. I love the colour. I'm not sure about the form. It's got funny little white bits that grow out from the centre, so it wouldn't win any prizes. But I'll keep growing it. I know I showed you Blackjack in the last video, but the rain does something else to it. It looks really interesting in the rain. And here's another shot of one of my all-time favourites, Golden Impact. Just love that colour. Hollyhill Regal's a lovely flower. I love it. The only trouble with it is I can't tell how high a particular one's going to grow. I've got this one that's growing to 4 foot. I've got another one down there that's growing to 6 foot, and then I've got another one that's probably 7 feet tall. So I never know where to put it. I saw this one at the UK National Dahlia Show a couple of years ago. It's called Clearview Jonas. I decided there and then that I needed to have this dahlia in my garden, and it's not let me down. This flame red flower is called Rycroft Huntsman. This is the first flower I've had on this plant. I love the colour of it, flame red, but one thing about it that is a problem is that it's a very, very slow starter. It was one of the last ones to get shooted in the spring, so it's only just catching up now. Believe it or not, this little delicate fimbriated pink and white cactus, which is called Marlene Joy, produces one of the best tubers that any dahlia produces. It's impossible to lose it over winter, and come the spring it shoots and shoots so that you can get 10-15 plants off one field tuber very easily. Virtually indestructible. This orange small ball dahlia is called Germander. It wins lots and lots of prizes, and it's been doing that for years. Very strong grower, look at the stems on it. There's a famous British TV presenter and gardener called Charlie Dimmock. My old mate Ken Stock raised this dahlia and named it after her. It's a waterlily variety. It's quite similar to Gwyneth, a little darker shade perhaps. It wins quite a few prizes in national competitions. And it grows to about 7 feet tall. This beauty is an American dahlia called J.S. Dorothy Rose. Love the colour of it. I'm going to keep growing this seedling, red and white one. Unlike Happy Austria flag, all the flowers seem to be more or less the same. I particularly like the yellow bit in the middle. I decided to keep growing this one because of the lovely colour combination of the purple and the white, but unfortunately on the same plant I've got one that's all the same colour, single purple, and I don't think the form is probably worth keeping it. I'll probably give it another go next year. I told you in the previous episode that I was probably going to throw out this one because the stems aren't strong enough. But the one next to it, I'd previously said had horrible green centres. Well, as the summer's gone on, the centres have improved, so it's quite nice, that one. And I particularly like the way that the little gold tips appear at the end of all the petals. So another go for this one, I think. Probably won't bother with this one again. The form's not up to much. Nice colour, but poor form. The blooms on this seedling start out like this, pretty ugly with an ugly green eye. But as time goes by, they improve, so the eye shrinks until eventually you get a very nice dahlia actually. I'm rather impressed with this one, so I'll definitely grow it next year. Probably the best one that I've grown from seed myself is this one. I haven't given it a name yet, but I love the salmon colour, and it's a nice form as well, I think. So I'll definitely be giving this one a name. Now this is the same variety in the garden at the front of the house. I hope that you can see that the petals on this have split. So there's a possibility that it'll end up being a fimbriated variety. Perhaps I'd better not name it and register it until I'm totally sure what it's going to become. In the last episode, I confidently stated that the stems on Winholm Diane, this small decorative, are very strong and are able to support the blooms. Well, I might have to amend that, because last night I found that a couple of the stems on a couple of blooms have broken off and had to chop the flowers off. I've now given it a bigger stake to tie it up a little bit better, but I'm going to have to keep my eye on this one. I hope it does okay, because all these yellow flowers are really eye-catching. I love the colour of this one. My Robin. Not sure that the form would win any prizes, but I also like the foliage on it. It's very unusual, the foliage on this one. This combination of the yellow goldstem rudbeckia and the blue aster monche are beginning to look nice. And the cosmos that are planted behind them are starting to show flowers as well, so hopefully, all in all, it'll give a good effect. At the front of the border I've planted 2 different varieties of lobelia. Now they were supposed to give a nice colour contrast, the light blue Cambridge blue contrasting with the dark blue Crystal Palace. Well, so far it's looking like they're all the same colour. The contrast is a little bit too subtle, I'm afraid. When I planted out these dwarf dahlias at the front of the border, I left 18-inch gaps between the different varieties and filled them with a variety of plants. Believe it or not, there are some nemesias down there, but they've got totally swamped. As have the marigolds that are planted there. Perhaps that's not a bad thing, because the flowers on this nemesia look to be coming to an end. So I hope the dahlias keep continuing to grow sideways. You learn something new every year. Now in general I'm not overly keen on colorette varieties because they keep losing all the petals. But Heather likes it, so I'm going to grow this one, Edith Jones, again next year. Now this yellow water lily is probably the oldest variety that I grow. It's called Glory van Heemstede. It probably doesn't have as many petals as the modern water lily varieties do, but it still looks good as a garden plant. Ken Stock gave me this variety called Mayon Warrior a few years ago. He sent it to a few nurseries to try, but none of them ever took it on and sold it. So now he's no longer alive, there's a probability that I will never be able to get another one, and this is the last one I've got. By the time I make another episode of this diary, we will have had our open weekend, our National Garden Scheme charity open weekend. There'll then be less pressure on me to try to keep the garden looking perfect. Then my thoughts will turn to producing some seeds for next year to try growing some more new varieties. You see, in order to produce seed, you need to expose the centre of the plant to the bees, and to do that, you need to remove all the petals from the flower. I can't deny that when you do that, they don't look very attractive. So I have to be confident that nobody else is going to come and want to look around the garden. So in the next episode, I promise to show you what I do to produce seed. In the meantime, enjoy your gardening.